Hello, and welcome to Truly Terrifying. This channel aims to bring you the best in true horror from around the world. In this episode, we have 10 true scary ghost stories. Ex-death row wing haunting. I work at the prison where Ted Bundy was executed. It is very easy to find which prison, but to cover my ass, I cannot post the specific name of the prison, and was assigned on our death row wing, aka G Wing, one of the most haunted places in the prison. To give some background to working on G Wing, or Golf Wing, G Wing used to house death row inmates as they await their executions in the prison. It is set up similarly to other wings in the prison, except a little different. The wing is divided between 3 floors and 6 rows of 17 cells each row. We no longer house death row on the wing, and the first floor is the only floor with inmates housed in the cells. These inmates are open population inmates placed on disciplinary confinement. The second floor contains 5 supermax cells. The third cell down on the right side row actually held Ted Bundy and is a supermax cell. The rest of the cells on the second floor are empty and still have TV stands. The third floor is empty as well, with regular cells. Our quarterdeck is a small 15 times 20-ish feet on the second floor, where we have a desk set up and a few chairs, bathroom and break room with a fridge and microwave. The quarterdeck is where the officers chill while in between rounds and activities. The staircase that goes to all 3 floors is directly to the right of the quarterdeck, next to the front door of the wing. The wing is also generally dark, and the emptiness of the wing, keep in mind the wing is meant to hold over 100 inmates and only usually holds 30-ish inmates on the first floor, give the wing a dead silent, foreboding feeling. Now that you understand the way the ex-death row wing is set up, I can go ahead with the stories. When I first started working the prison, I was told by one of my fellow corrections officers that G Wing is the easiest wing to work due to the fact that you only have to walk the 2 rows on the first floor, making your round quicker and easier. However, the trade-off is that the wing is fucking creepy, with long dark empty rows, flickering lights, out of place noises, footsteps, doors opening on their own. This wing had it all, but everyone picked it because after all, it's the easiest wing to work. I finally worked G-Wing for the first time about a month ago, and still remember the first time I ever dealt with something just so unexplainable. I entered the wing at around 6 PM and proceeded to do my first rounds, basically just making sure all the gates are locked, showers, closets, pipe chases, everything. After doing my rounds and everything was locked and all my inmates were good, me and the other corrections officers started shooting the shit. Around 9 PM, the first weird thing happened that made us all question it, but not really freak out. We had the second floor pipe chase open on the quarterdeck, our smoking spot, and I and another unnamed corrections officer were burning up when we heard loud clangs above us on the 3rd floor catwalk. Keep in mind, the only way for someone to go on the 3rd floor catwalk in the pipe chase would be to have the house keys to unlock the pipe chase, which were on my hip. We brushed it off as a rat and kept smoking and continued the shift. I'm unsure of the exact time this happened, but it was after 2 AM and before 5 AM. Me and the other 2 COs were on the quarterdeck talking when we were cut off by a long and loud creaking noise from the 3rd floor. We all agreed that it sounded like the row gate being opened on the 3rd, so we grabbed our flashlights and ran up the stairs, thinking that somehow an inmate from the 1st floor escaped and made it to the 3rd floor without us noticing. All of which was very improbable, but it was the only logical thing we could come up with. We arrived on the 3rd floor and immediately began checking the row gates, which were locked, and so were all the closets and cell doors. But we know we heard it, all 3 of us did, and we are certain of it. It was a door or a gate swinging open. We went back down to the quarterdeck and quietly talked the rest of the night. My second experience actually happened recently when I was assigned to G-Wing again, and genuinely shook me worse than the last experience. Now for reference, there was a cute corrections officer assigned to the wing with myself and another corrections officer, and me, being the absolute genius that I am, decided I would impress her by going into Ted Bundy's old cell and shit-talking him, while alone. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the side 2 row with the Supermax cells until I came up to the 3rd cell. The lights were already on in the cells. I looked inside the cell, just checking it out and building up my confidence before yelling, "Ted Bundy, you're a bitch." Right as the last word left my mouth, the cell light turned off and on, and I felt like I was freezing. I quickly ran back to the quarterdeck and told the others what happened, and I could tell they were each trying to figure out whether or not to believe me. Needless to say, I do not mess with Bundy anymore on that wing. Those are my 2 personal stories, but any correction officer that has worked that wing can tell you a thing or two. Even the inmates that are housed on the wing are terrified and always silent. I remember asking them why they are so quiet, to which one, who has been in G-Wing for a while, stated, "Because, sir, the police aren't the only ones we see walking down the row," and he left it at that. Another inmate who used to be on death row and housed in Ted Bundy's old cell was hearing Ted in the cell along with other voices and tried telling the wing sergeant that he needed to be pulled out. The wing sergeant wouldn't pull him, so this inmate cut up his arms and passed out from how much blood he lost, and almost died, just so he wouldn't be in that specific cell. Other corrections officers and myself also talk about feeling a sense of dread when walking down the empty rows, which I have also felt and seen shadows move in my peripheral view. G-Wing is the easiest wing in the building to work. I would gladly work there again, but is one creepy ass place. The doll in the storage room. When I was younger, I would go and visit my grandparents all the time. They lived in a 1-floor house with an unfinished basement. I never liked it down there. It felt small for a big basement. There was a little door down there that was for storage, and I always got a horrible feeling when going close to it. And let me add that this was a newer house that was only about 6 years old. Now, during the time I was about 6 or 7, I felt so uncomfortable going down there even when I was with someone. I didn't like it. I remember going down there with my grandma to help with something. She had to run upstairs because someone rang the doorbell. She said she would be right back, even though she knew how I felt about being alone down there, but I nodded and said okay. She was gone and I was alone, and I started to get a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't move and I didn't want to, even though the lights were on. Now this is where everything started happening, and it still gives me the chills. The lights started to flicker and I started to hear noises and what sounded like talking, and it was not coming from upstairs, but in the storage room. I heard someone say my name. Here is the part that freaks me out the most. The voice sounded like my grandma. I was confused as hell. How am I hearing her when she is upstairs? I didn't want to move, but being the curious one I am, I started moving towards the storage room door. The closer I got, the worse the bad feeling came. When I got to the door, the lights turned off in the basement. I wanted to run upstairs and hide, go home, somewhere that wasn't the basement. I heard my name again for a second time. My grandma's voice asking me to open the door, to help her, so I did, and I regret it. I couldn't see anything, it was pitch black. I couldn't hear anything but faint laughing that felt like forever. But then the laughing stopped and the lights turned back on in the basement, and I felt a little bit better with the light back on. But the downside, I could see a little into the storage room. I saw a small clown doll in the storage room, and my grandma hates clowns with a passion and wants nothing to do with them. So why is there a clown doll? I have no damn idea. Then the lights turned on in the storage room. I saw red that looked like blood all over the place. I screamed and blacked out, and the next thing I knew, I was laying on the couch, my grandma looking at me and asking if I was okay. I have no idea if that was real or a dream, but it sure as hell felt real. If you have any ideas, please let me know. Childhood ghost stories from our old apartment. Just saw a video on YouTube about ghost stories, and it made me remember my own personal experiences as a child. From 5 years old up until 12 years old, I used to hear and see spirits. Our old apartment was haunted, and all of us siblings were used to it growing up, but only realised it when we moved to a different house, and all of the weird noises and voices and odd occurrences stopped. I remember all of us freaking out when I opened up with the conversation, "Do you guys remember when doors would shut without anyone doing it, nor any wind inside the house? Do you guys remember the stairs making sounds like someone was going up and down the stairs?" That's when we all started sharing our own stories. Then we all realised that I was the one who experienced the most when I started telling them examples after examples. I'll share 3 memories that I still remember vividly. A quick visit. When I was 5 or 6, I was seated on our couch getting ready for my regular doctor visits. My mum is a nurse, and she takes health and wellness seriously. My mum was facing towards me, putting on my socks, and I was facing the stairs. Our stairs at our old apartment was L-shaped, and it cuts off as it goes past the ceiling. It creates a shadow around the area of it cutting off past the ceiling. As my mum was putting on my socks, I remember pointing towards our stairs. I asked her who the old man was over there. My mum turned around and looked at the spot I was pointing, and she told me there was no one there. I was confused because I can see an old man standing, looking down at us. His face was bloody, with all bloody cloth covering half his face. He had a beard and was staring at us. I remember not being scared, but more curious. He didn't look malevolent. I kept pointing, and my mum told me to try and describe what he looked like. After I told her what I was seeing, my mum told me that he reminded her of her uncle who got assassinated while he was gardening at his home. This is a crazy story, but for a different topic. He was shot in the face and died in the hospital, which was not too long ago, but before I was born. She confirmed this story years later, and it still creeps her out whenever we talked about it. I think he was just checking up on us. Maybe he wanted to say hi. It needed a rest. Years later, maybe around 10, I was alone in my room. We had a bunk bed because I shared a room with my older brother. The bunk bed was made of metal and had a mesh design underneath the mattress. My brother's spot was the bottom, and whenever he sits on his bed, the metal mesh makes a squeaky sound or rusty sound. He always drops down on his bed and never sits on it slow, giving a quick squeaky sound. I don't know how exactly to describe this sound. So hearing it on a daily basis, I am familiar with that sound. One day, I was just sitting, chilling on my desk, and my CD player stopped playing after playing the whole album. It was just dead silent. I was sketching something, so I wasn't really bothered by the silence. All of a sudden, I heard my brother's bunk bed make the squeaky sound. It was very slow, like someone was pushing down or sitting down really slow. I immediately froze, and I was trying to process what was happening. I started deducing in my mind, I'm alone, my brother is still in his ROTC, and there's no one else in the room besides me. When I realised that it must be something else, I gathered my nerves and told the ghost that I'm scared of ghosts and I hope he, she, it doesn't show themselves. The squeaking stopped, and I remember trembling. I decided it was the moment. I bolted out of the room, didn't even bother glancing towards the bed. I was legit scared and was screaming as I sprinted down the stairs. I told my parents that there's a ghost in the room, and my parents told me that they don't exist and that it was just my imagination. Despite telling them every detail of the story, to no avail, they simply reminded me it must have been something natural like wood creaking or the wind or the neighbours. I am 100% sure it was the bed. I know that creaking sound, and it was very close, not muffled like it was beyond the walls of our room or from the outside. It was right behind me. It was coming from our bunk bed. Also, how would it make that sound if not for someone or something actually sitting or laying on the bed? This memory still gives me the shivers. A gathering. My last memory of a ghost encounter was the year before we moved. I was 12 at this point, and it happened in the middle of the night. It was an uncommon occurrence for me to wake up in the middle of the night. This particular night was the scariest night in my life. and I get a weird feeling in my stomach whenever I think about it. It's not really anything big like Hollywood level scary, but the sheer terror that I felt left an imprint on my memory. So I remember waking up in the middle of the night for some reason, and I just stared in the ceiling, trying to go back to sleep. I was probably half awake at this point. Then all of a sudden, I felt like there's someone right beside my bed, like a presence. So I'm on the top bunk of our bunk bed, and I just felt someone was standing beside the bed. I remember my heart started beating fast, and I immediately went fully awake, and my body just got stiff from this uneasy feeling. Mind you, it wasn't a sleep paralysis episode, because I could have moved and was actually comfortable when I woke up. So I decided to gather my strength and look to my right, because I really wanted to know if there was anyone besides my bed, out of curiosity. As I looked to my right, I saw 4 figures wearing black, like funeral formal attire, looking down on me. They were tall, because even though I was on the top bunk, they were looking down. Their faces were blurry, but they were anthropomorphic. I could tell that there were 3 males and 1 female. I stared right back at them, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. As it finally clicked in my head that they're spirits, ghosts, I screamed and grabbed a pillow and placed it on top of my head as I pivoted away from them. I was crying and was purely terrified. I started praying and hoping that they won't touch me or come close. I remember repeating the Apostles' Creed prayer for St. Michael, Hail Mary and Glory be. I was raised Catholic. I was chanting these prayers under my breath until I fell asleep. I woke up the next day. It was nice and sunny and they were gone. I'm just having goosebumps as I'm typing this. I have other stories like these ones that my siblings and I experienced around the house and thought were normal, but they were actually abnormal. My older brother and sister also have encounters of their own as well. Let me know if you'd like to hear these stories. Stay safe and have a good night. I lived beside a Canadian heritage dollhouse built in 1898. Hi guys, I've had a couple of experiences in my life, but there's always one that I like to bring up every now and then, by a nice campfire. This one in particular pretty much creeped me out after I realised what I saw years later. A bit of background. So I'm a 28-year-old male who lives in British Columbia, Canada. This experience happened when I was about 9 years old. During the time we used to live by a heritage site, which was called the Pilloth House. Google it. My family, and pretty much the whole neighbourhood, used to refer to this house as the creepy dollhouse every time we drove by or spoke of it. This experience had happened on a windy, somewhat rainy fall day. I was sick that day, so my mom made me stay home and not show up to school. At the time, it was only me and my mom at home. I had 2 older brothers and sisters that were in high school and my dad was at work. My mom used to sew clothes for a living and worked from home a couple of days during the week. Right outside the rear sliding door that exits to the backyard, we built a small shed-like room area where my mom could sew and store her sewing machine, supplies, etc. She would be in there for a couple of hours a day and would check up on me when it was time for lunch, etc. On this particular day, it was just a normal sick day for me, just like every other sick day. I woke up, had some cereal and turned on the TV and watched some Barney while my mom was in the backyard sewing her clothes. The couch I was on was facing the TV, so my head was turned to the left. In front of me was a black glass fireplace with a reflection where my feet were facing. We also had a hallway that would lead up to the bedrooms where my head was pointing at. As I was watching Barney, I remember this pretty vividly, I noticed a dark figure with its knees bent, hunched over and swaying side to side with its arms bent out on the reflection of my fireplace. This figure was dancing for a couple of seconds until I turned around to look down the hallway and nothing was there. It was almost as if it was mimicking what Barney was doing on the TV. I wasn't frightened because I thought it could have been one of my siblings home for lunch just screwing with me. I called out my siblings' names, but no one answered. I even ran down the hallway and checked out all the rooms, but again, no one was there. I ran out to get my mum and told her what happened, so we both came inside to look around the house. But the house was empty. But here's the strangest part. Sometimes I'll leave this part out just because it makes it even more unbelievable. As we were coming out of the hallway, the front door slammed open, so I had to go downstairs and close and lock it. It was a windy day, but the door should have been locked. We didn't think much of it and sort of brushed it off. Fast forward more than 10 years later, by this time we had already moved out. My sister came to visit me and my parents, and we were talking over lunch. My sis had recently learned that her friend's dad works for the government and was assigned to take care and maintain the Pilloth house. She only brought this up because the Pilloth house, again, used to be right beside us. This would require him to stay at night so he could wake up and do yard work. Apparently he has had some frequent experiences in that house, such as random footsteps, knocking, but mostly someone jumping on his bed while he was trying to sleep. He was never bothered by it because it was so frequent. He mentioned that there was a spirit of a little boy and a man in that house. As she was telling us this, I immediately connected the dots. I'm pretty sure I met the little boy and it seemed like he just wanted to play. I remember at the time when it all happened, I wasn't at all scared, but now that I think about it, it was a bit creepy. Anyway, I've had one more experience with a different entity in that house before as well. Maybe I'll share that another day. Demon girl followed my mom for years. So I don't know how many people really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, or in people who say they can see them. I wouldn't ever say I'm a professional psychic or medium. I'm not. I just know I've always been able to see things other people couldn't, hear things other people couldn't, know things other people didn't. Pretty much my whole life. I felt like a freak and a weirdo for a long time until I just realised this is happening and it isn't going away, so I needed to accept it. I got help from professional mediums and the woo-woo community, and it helped. Backstory, but important. I was laying in bed in my room a couple of years ago trying to fall asleep. It was a long hallway and my sister's room was at the end, so was my mom's. My sister had a friend over who was dealing with an abusive boyfriend, and they were drinking and talking about it. This will be important. You know how you get the feeling someone's watching you, or that feeling in a store when you just know someone's stepped into your space? You don't have to look, you just know. That's what I felt. I looked up, and there's some girl with just her head poked into my room sideways. I just saw her head, sideways leaning past the door frame. She looked shorter, maybe 20s, long black hair, kind of like the girl from The Ring. I'm looking at her wondering what she wanted, and she started to smile. Slowly, her eyes got huge and black, and her jaw unhinged into this huge, sick, pitch-black smile. Ice cold slammed into the pit of my stomach as I just stared at her for what felt like hours, frozen in fear, before what I had been taught kicked in and I made her leave. She instantly turned back to normal and skipped off down my hallway towards my sister's room. I thought, oh, it's with my sister's friend. Depression and abuse and all those bad situations can really attract those types of beings, so I didn't think any more of it. Fast forward to literally last night. It's been years. My parents got divorced, which is a whole other post of creepy shit. I realised it wasn't just my dad that was the narcissist. It's absolutely my mom too. They were a toxic pair. And currently, I'm in a situation where I have to live with my mom. It's fine, it's free, I'll be grateful and deal with it. Last night, I'm laying in my bed watching TV, minding my own business. Suddenly, I feel that feeling again. It's always the same feeling, regardless of what type of ghost it is. For me, anyway. I looked at the door, and it's the exact same girl. I asked her what she was doing here. She didn't answer. She just started smiling, only this time her eyes went white and her mouth grew into the same huge black grin. But she had tons of teeth like a shark. This is where a professional medium could figure all these ins and outs of who and what and where, but I'm not that good. I get up to get my incense. This drives them out. and she runs in the direction of my mum's room. I go out into the hallway and look in that direction, and I see through my mum's cracked door this weird demon girl literally sitting crouched on top of my mum, staring at me like she's an animal claiming her prey. It was wild. I've never ever seen anything like that before, ever. I also realised this girl was never with my sister's friend. She was with my mum for however many years, but my mum's are crazy and very, very negative, regardless of what anyone does to help her. She loves drama and loves being a victim and loves complaining, so it's matching her energy, I guess. This ghost girl feels more like a bully than anything truly demonic, like she had fun picking on people, which my mum absolutely does too. This ghost girl can't hurt me. She's just around, and man, it sure is scary when she is. She looks like an absolute demon, that's for sure. I've since seen other types of entities in her room at night while she slept and have told her about it. She says that I'm crazy in one sentence, and then in the next says how it does feel dark. Shrug. We'll see. When I saw a spirit for the first time. Back in about 2004, I was very, very young, pushing 6 years old. I remember being at my old house in Michigan. I was in my kitchen, which is connected to my basement and laundry room on one side. The other side connects to this long hallway that leads to the family room, and past the family room leads to the end of the hallway that reaches all 4 rooms at the end. Left side was my parents' old room, top left was the bathroom, top right was my brother's. That was the only visible room from the other end of the hallway, and then on the far right was my old room. I remember growing up in this house that was a very normal house at first, and nothing weird has ever happened at this point in my life, and the first of many occurrences started at this stage of my life. I used to follow my mum around a lot when I was little. I used to really look up to her, and one morning I was looking for her and I closed my fridge and turned the corner of my kitchen to the family room down that long hallway, and there's this woman who was way taller than me. She stood at the very end of the hallway with her back facing the wall, just looking at me, and from what I could remember, she had no facial expressions and didn't blink. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, as the only woman figure in my house ever was my mum that young. It didn't look like my mum, but as a little kid, I didn't care. I kept saying, "Mom." She said nothing. At this point, I was getting confused and irritated and worried that something was wrong. She put her hand out and did the "come here" movement with her hand and said nothing. She didn't talk. I started walking down the family room hallway towards her, and before I even got halfway, she turned around and hovered into my bedroom, the far right side. Out of all 4 rooms, she went into mine, so I followed her into my bedroom. Seconds later, when I got in there, she was not there. I looked everywhere, under my bed, side of my bed. I even went in the closet. She wasn't there. So I checked all the other bedrooms. Nothing. This was the first time in my entire life I saw a person disappear, and I just remember thinking that it made no sense, because there was no getting behind me. There was no other connection to the kitchen. You had to go back through the hallway to get back to the kitchen. I kept saying, "Mom, where are you?" No answer. Finally, after minutes of looking everywhere, I walked back through the hallway and searched the kitchen. Nothing. I went into the laundry room and my mum was washing clothes with her back turned. I said, "Mom, there you are." And she looked confused. I said, "Weren't you in the family room just now?" She said, "No, I've been washing clothes for an hour and never moved." It took me 10 years, to which I was about 16 years old, before I started telling this story. I guess as a little kid I just shook it off and didn't care since I found my mom. As I got older and looked back, that memory always existed in my mind, and I finally shared it with my family and friends. Looking back, I wondered certain things about the incident, like how long was that woman standing there before I came? Did she know I was going to act exactly like I did in that moment? Did she know where my room was, and that was a way of her telling me that she knew me? When she went into my room out of the 4. This was the first weird occurrence in my entire life. After that, years later, little things out of the ordinary started happening. Not just with me, but with other members of the family. I got a ton more stories to share, so stay tuned. My 2-year-old nephew saw a ghost and it was pretty scary. So a few months ago, I was tasked with babysitting my nephew as his mum had to work late. I did his normal bedtime routine. I've done this tons of times in the same room, so it was nothing new. I put him to bed and read him his book and then left and turned the lights off. When I did that, he immediately started crying, so I came back to see if he was okay. When I asked him what was wrong, he started pointing at the roof in one particular spot. I asked him if someone was there and he said yes, so I figured he wasn't going to sleep in his bed that night, so me and him crashed on the couch together and he managed to sleep fine. He was incredibly shaken up and wouldn't stop clinging to me like something was going to hurt him. The next day, I spoke to his mum and it turns out that an uncle died here years and years ago, but visits on occasion, and that's probably what he saw. Now, this was a few months ago, but yesterday I was FaceTiming with his mum, who said that he came back and is now disturbing the whole house, and so she is going to have to sage the place, and if that fails, hire someone to get rid of the ghost, as from what I gathered, her kids could be in danger from what this spirit has been doing. Sucks, as I love ghosts, but her family could be in danger because he has started throwing things and making her kids wake up at random hours during the night. My haunted house. I live in a weird town where most of the houses are built in the 60s. A lot of the features are still in my house. When I first moved in, me and my sister immediately thought the place was haunted, so we salted all the doors, mostly because we watched Supernatural and thought that was a good idea. While moving, we had to go through the previous occupant's stuff because he died suddenly without any family. My mum kept some furniture and quirky objects, but nothing was really suspicious. My family has always been a bit aware of different energies, e.g. we get detailed dreams that come true or have really strong instincts, can manifest stuff, that type of thing. And my grandma is a pastor, so my mum chalked it up to being close to God. I don't know about that though. I was going through the kitchen cabinets when I found a coin from the Civil War taped to the top of one. It was all weathered down as if someone had rubbed it often. I didn't know why it was taped to the top, as it was pretty much worth about $10 in the condition it was in. Even in mint condition, it was worth only $40. The coin kind of gave me a bad feeling, but not in a horrible type of way, just like it had a lot of people it was passed down on. The fact that it was Civil War and the previous occupant was very southern kind of made me creeped out, since I'm black. But I just put it in an old Altoids box and forgot about it. Pretty much a year after being moved in, I would get these weird feelings I was being watched. I would just be doing my homework in my room and chills would wash over me. I ignored it for a couple of months before I started getting weird dreams. This white human shape appeared in my dreams. Its face was blurry, but it didn't have any defined features. I always remembered my dreams because I'd go to sleep really late and wake up at 4 a.m. every day for school. One morning my alarm went off and I turned over to turn it off, and that white shape was standing over me as if checking to see if I was asleep. I stared at it in the darkness, too scared to even breathe, and it just kind of acted like it noticed I was awake and drifted through my bedroom door. My heartbeat was so fast I could feel it in my teeth. I laid in my bed staring at my ceiling for an hour, wondering if I had just had sleep paralysis or maybe I was still dreaming. But when I saw it, my sinuses immediately cleared because I was so surprised. When I got home from school, I asked my mum if she had been in my room that night. My mum is black, so she wouldn't appear as a white faceless humanoid thing, and she was 5'5", while this thing was as tall as my door, so at least 7 foot. She said no, and I guess the terror on my face made her wonder what happened. I told her and she just told me to pray. A couple of months later, I got my door taken off because my mom wanted to replace it, so I had a kind of translucent curtain in place for privacy. I was sitting in my bed doing my homework as usual when I glanced up and that white shape was watching me through the curtain. I stared at it for what felt like 10 minutes before shouting at it to go away. I don't know why I felt this would work, but it kind of drifted off and faded away. I told some Wiccan girl in my class about it, and she said that it's because my brain saw the ghost as white that it meant it was good. And just curious, but it sounded like BS to me. Every inch of my body feared that thing. I felt like it didn't have any good intentions. A couple of weeks afterwards, the feeling of being watched grew, but only when I was alone or the house was empty. I went into my mom's room to sleep that night because she had a bad dream and wanted company, and I woke up at 2 a.m. with that shape standing over me and my mom. For some reason, I closed my eyes and pretended it wasn't there for a minute while shaking my mum awake. When I asked her if she saw a white shape standing over the bed, she said she didn't see anything, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. After that, I didn't see it anymore, and I hope I never do. But my sister, who comes to visit every summer, still does. We prefer not to talk about it, and honestly, I still feel that fear thinking about it. But a couple of weeks ago, I was out in the garage looking for my cat. She likes to crawl into the attic for some reason. The attic door dropped from underneath her, and there was a yearbook from 1938 in it. The attic is so small, it only has insulation and AC pipes in it. I've been up there myself, and I've never seen anything in it. A person can't even fit in it. But now I run past the opening where the door used to be. I always feel like a face is going to be watching me from there. Maybe that shape owned the yearbook and the coin, I don't know. To the best of my knowledge, the previous occupant was the only person to ever live there, and he wasn't 7 feet tall. He didn't die in the house either. He was a family friend, and he died in a nursing home, so I don't know. Still pretty creepy though. I now regularly burn sage. Even if it doesn't work, it gives me peace of mind. The Watcher upstairs. I have innumerable wonderful memories of my grandparents' house growing up, and it is still one of my favourite places to visit. The memory I have written here, however, I am still unsure about. This is the story of the spirit that haunts my grandparents' house. The house itself is almost typical for a spooky story, but in this case the cliché holds true. It's an old farmhouse in rural Illinois. It sits on 100 acres of my family's land. Most of it's either fields of corn or soybeans depending on the year, but some of it is also pasture land for a pair of my grandmother's horses. A small farm pond, forests, a creek, and patches of vineyards. Now the vineyards make my grandparents sound rich, but that cliché does not hold true in this case. This isn't a large vineyard. There is also a barn, machine shed, and disused hog building, and a garage near the house. The house was built over 100 years ago. Originally, my grandmother tells me the dining room and cellar beneath it were built as a frontier post office in the Pony Express days. Later, my great-great-grandfather and his family would immigrate from Europe and add on to the structure to build the house and farm buildings as they stand today, with the exception of the original barn and corn crib, which were consumed by a catastrophic fire in the early 1990s. This was always my favourite place in the world growing up. Of course, everyone loves their grandparents' house, but as a kid who grew up in a more suburban environment, who craved adventure and the outdoors, the farm was so much more appealing to me. My grandparents and I were, and still are, very close. I spent a lot of time here growing up, which is why I have come to know it so well. Every creak in the floorboards, every groan of the house on a windy day, the howl of the coyotes at night, and the dank smell of the leaky cellar. Despite the fact that I know this place like the back of my hand and holding it in a special place in my heart, there is, and always has been, something about it that made me feel uneasy when I was upstairs or was alone in the house. One room in particular gave me an intense feeling I was being watched. Now you might be thinking I have read too many ghost stories or watched too many horror movies, as this sounds so typical. But this started when I was very young, before my parents ever allowed me to watch something scarier than a classic Disney movie. Those ideas just weren't in my brain yet. The room that made me uncomfortable was what was always referred to as Drew's room. Even though my mother, aunt and 3 uncles had moved out of the house, they still had some sort of small claim over the bedrooms. Every time I went in this room, I felt eyes on me. It didn't help that there was a black and white and sepia-coloured photographs of long-dead relatives on the wall, and even an old doll of my aunt's that was always sitting in an old wooden chair. But I somehow knew that it wasn't just the photos and the doll watching me, however spooky they were. It was something else. I would always leave that room as quickly as I could when I had to go in there. The feeling of an invisible person being near me is just enough to trigger my flight response. Fighting isn't much of an option if you can't see what is causing the feeling of danger. When I was younger, my family lived in another town 3 hours away from my grandparents, so we would stay over for Christmas. One year, when I was about 5 or 6 and my brother was still a toddler, my dad and I ended up sharing Drew's room on Christmas Eve, while my mum and brother stayed in another room. I slept on the floor that night in a sleeping bag, while my dad slept on the old twin bed. I couldn't sleep for what seemed like the whole night. In my little mind, I was frozen, not daring to move. I couldn't decide if I felt safer with my eyes open or closed, and switched between the two defense strategies repeatedly. Something or someone was watching me. I awoke the next morning and dashed out of the room. The excitement of Christmas held back the creepy feeling in the morning sunlight, but will never forget that Christmas Eve. The feeling that something else was there continued into my adolescent years. One day, when I was at the house and chatting with my grandmother, we somehow ended up on the topic of ghosts. My family is Catholic and we tend to believe in spirits or lost souls. If I remember correctly, we might have been talking about my grandma and I's theory that ghosts are souls in purgatory who have not made it to heaven yet. In this conversation, I saw my chance to ask about the room upstairs that had creeped me out all these years. I told her that I always felt like I was being watched in that room ever since I was little. Without hesitation and with the utmost seriousness, she said that the room was where my grandfather's uncle had died of a heart attack. The topic came up again later when my grandfather came in from the machine shed, and he told me he remembers his uncle dying upstairs when he was a boy, and that he can still remember his family carrying his uncle's lifeless body on a chair down the stairs because the stretcher couldn't make the sharp curve on the old narrow staircase. The case was solved. I knew it had to be my grandfather's uncle up there watching me all those years. Ever since then, even though I don't like the feeling of invisible eyes on me, I have liked to think he watches over our family in a benign way, making sure we're all okay. At least I hope that's what it is. Haunted neighbourhood. This happened 10 years back when I was in middle school. I had a lot of friends of my age from different schools. On the weekends, I used to wait for all of them to return home from school to go for a walk in the woods until 4 in the evening. There were also times when they would all wait for me to return from my extra classes. Our neighbourhood gets dark easily once it is 6, so all of our moms have this strict rule to be back at the home by 6 o'clock. So in total we have 2 hours. Most of my friends first of all talk about some random things like their plans for the next weekend and about the girls they like. I'm gay, so I did not find any talks about girls very interesting. Moreover, I felt offended. After all these general talks, we'd go for a ghost hunting in the nearby abandoned houses and huts. It gets really spooky when all these crickets start making noises, and normally I am the one who gives everybody the strength to walk further. One day we were all walking along the roadside near the canal, and we saw an old woman washing her clothes. On a normal day at 5:30 in the evening, we've never seen any aged people walking or doing something in this place. We've been doing this for months, so we know all the routes and the nature of the roadways and the woods. The fact that we have not completely explored the place still makes us a little annoyed because we really wanted to finish watching everything that surrounded the woods. The woman did not acknowledge our presence. She continued what she was doing. One of my friends picked up a stone from the sidewalk and threw it into the canal where she was washing her clothes. It was totally unexpected, and we didn't even notice him picking up the stone. God damn, this woman just turned around with a stupid ugly face that I thought my heart just came out of my chest. For a moment I could not even believe what I saw and couldn't breathe either. I just grabbed one of the hands of my friend and yelled at the rest of them to run as fast as they could. Most of us looked back to see if she was following us, but we could not see her as if she was not there in the first place. We all reached my house, went to my room, drank plenty of water until we were okay. We just looked into everybody's eyes and decided never to talk about it. It happened that literally all of us had nightmares throughout the next week that could relate to the face we saw. We never visited the woods again. Most of them are college graduates now. When we remember this incident, we have this question in our minds about whether to believe it or to consider it a mere act of imagination. But we all didn't imagine the same thing. It still gives us chills.